Hi, this is Rabbi Tzvi Mendel of Congregation called Bnei Yisrael, community of Jewish friends, and I'm so excited that we started already the halachas of Pesach, and we will continue B'nei, and we'll go back and see what the Rav has to say, though I don't have the Kitzer with okay, whatever it is. We'll go back to it at some point, and some things we'll have out more like we usually do it. I'm looking for the place. Okay. Yeah, we finished 107. Possible at some point we'll go back and bring out some more of the points, like the way the Rav brings it down, and like Rav Shulchan Halacha brings down. But here we'll try to, with Hashem's help, we'll try to cover as much as possible the Igros Moshes from Rav Feinstein and the other Paiskim, Mishnah Berurah included. Okay, chapter 108, the laws of the wheat and flour for the matzahs, containing 7 paragraphs. First paragraph will be about matzahs mitzvah, 2, split sprouting or wet kernels, 3, the flour mill, 4, a sack of flour that becomes wet, 5, to wait after grinding, 6, replacing or laundering the sacks, 7, placing sacks on an animal or upon other sacks. One of the major activities performed in anticipation of the festival of Pesach is the baking of matzah, the unleavened bread eaten during the festival. Matzah is made from a dough consisting of flour of one of the 5 species of grain: wheat, barley, spelt, rye, and oats, mixed with water. Now, Mishnah Berurah in 453 says, although matzahs may be baked from any of the 5 species of grain, and the laws of this chapter apply equally to all of them, nevertheless, the custom is to use wheat, since people favor it. And this is therefore considered beautification of the mitzvahs. This is a hidur mitzvah, since human beings usually favor this, the wheat. If wheat is not available, one should choose whichever of the other 4 species he considers most desirable. That's the Ramon 453, 1, with the Mishnah Berurah there. Okay, so we'll continue. Now, these 5 species of grain are not allowed to become chametz, leavened. Okay, we'll explain it as follows. The term chametz applies to all leavened products of the 5 species of grain that we mentioned. When we speak of leavened products, we mean those products containing one of these grains that has been allowed to ferment, even if no leavening agent has been introduced. This includes not only baked products such as bread, cake, cookies, crackers, etc., but even other products and derivatives of leavened grains, such as grain alcohol, beer, or whiskey. We'll get to this further on, which will be in chapter 112. Okay. On the first night of Pesach, there is a specific biblical requirement to eat matzah. Now, outside of Eretz Yisrael, outside of the land of Israel, this mitzvah also applies on the second night of Pesach by rabbinic law. The matzahs eaten on the first night, which are known as matzahs mitzvah, for they are the matzahs with which the mitzvah of eating matzah on the first nights of Pesach is fulfilled. That's why it's called matzah's mitzvah, are subject to an extra degree of safeguarding, which will be discussed in paragraph 1. On the rest of Pesach, although it is prohibited to eat chametz, not only is it prohibited to eat chametz on Pesach, it is also prohibited to derive benefit from chametz on Pesach, as we'll see in 117, for a number of applications of this prohibition. Furthermore, one may not even keep chametz in one's possession on Pesach, as we'll see in 111. Okay, we'll go further. There is no requirement to eat matzah. Okay, on the rest of Pesach, although it's prohibited to eat chametz, there's no requirement to eat matzah. However, if one wishes to eat grain products, they must be unleavened, since chametz is forbidden throughout the festival. One must also eat matzah at the Shabbos and Yom Tov meals of Pesach, when one is required to eat bread. Okay. Since the leavening process begins as soon as the grain comes into contact with water, the matzahs must be prepared meticulously, and the laws regarding the preparation of matzahs are quite extensive. Kitzer dedicates 3 simanim to these laws, 3 chapters to these laws, which we'll see later on. This chapter discusses the laws pertaining to the flour. The chapter that follows discusses the water, and chapter 110 discusses the actual baking of the matzahs. So that's what these 3 chapters will be about. I hope, with God's help tonight, we'll finish 108 at least, which, as we said, contains these 7 paragraphs. Okay. Now, this paragraph discusses the laws pertaining specifically to the matzah's mitzvah that we mentioned, eaten at the Seder on the first 2 nights of Pesach out of Israel, and only the first night in Eretz Yisrael, as we mentioned before. It is written in the Torah in Shmos 12:17, "You shall safeguard the matzahs." From here it is derived that we must safeguard the wheat that will be used for the matzah eaten at the Seder, for the sake of matzah's mitzvah, so that no water come upon it, come upon the wheat kernels, which can cause them to become chametz, as the leavening process begins as soon as detached grain or flour comes into contact with water. That is, for the matzahs that will be used for the mitzvah of eating matzah at the Seder, the fact that we have no reason to suspect that they become chametz does not suffice. Rather, they must have been specifically safeguarded for the purpose of matzah's mitzvah, as Mishnah Berurah says, 453:21, and Shulchan Aruch Harav in 453:14. We'll look it up right now. 453:14. Taf Mem Gimel Yudaled. Taf Nun Gimel Yudaled. Taf Gimel Yudaled says the Rav as follows. A person cannot fulfill his mitzvah except with matzah that a Jew watched from becoming chametz l'shem ha-Pesach, for the purpose of Pesach, purpose of the mitzvah of Pesach. This is a quote from Rashi over there in the Gemara. Gemara Pesachim. Excuse me. Lamed Hey, perhaps. Okay. So, as it says in the Torah, mentioned before, it says in the, there's Gemara Pesachim Mem. Now, a Jew has to watch it from becoming chametz, and it has to be l'shem ha-Pesach, for the purpose of Pesach. Shmarta b'sam matzis, you shall keep the matzis, you shall watch the matzis. She'yishmereni Yisrael l'shem mitzvahs matzah. The Jew should watch it for the purpose of the mitzvah of matzah. V'yeshamim, and others say, that's the Darkei Moshe, the Ramah in Darkei Moshe, and Tafayin Zayin, and Arzarua, the second Chelik Reish Mem Tes. So the Darkei Moshe and Arzarua understand that this l'shem mitzvahs bo'erev toichlu matzos, specifically for the mitzvah of eating matzahs the evening, the first evening of Pesach, or like we said, the first two out of Eretz Yisrael, out of Israel. Yeshamim and others say, l'shem mitzvahs shivas yomim toichlu matzos teichelu. It has to be watched over or kept or guarded for the purpose of the mitzvah of what the Torah says in Shmos 12, verse 15. The mitzvah of 7 days eating matzahs. In other words, he guarded the matzahs in order to be, so they should be eaten in the 7 days of Pesach. That's the specific kavanah and thought he has to have while he's protecting the matzah. V'chein ikar, and the Rabbi Shulchan says that's the halacha. Okay, 3 views. Okay. We shall go further. In the opinion of some of the great halachic authorities, may their memories be blessed, this safeguarding is required immediately from the time of reaping and onward. The custom, however, follows those authorities who rule that it suffices to safeguard them from when they are being brought for grinding and onward. Nevertheless, those who are meticulous in the performance of mitzvahs also concern themselves to guard the wheat from the time of reaping. And it's proper to do so, says the Kitzer Shulchan Aruch. Matzah that is made from such wheat is commonly referred to as shmura matzah, safeguarded matzah. Okay. It is fitting to take care that the stalks of grain do not remain standing attached in the field before being harvested, until they become fully dry and turn white. For then, if it were to rain on them, that is a considerable amount of rain, a light drizzle, however, does not present a concern, says the Mishnah Berurah in 467:18. Then they will become chametz even while still attached to the ground, since they no longer need to draw nourishment from the ground. That's the reason. Once the stalks no longer require nourishment from the ground, it is as if they are detached and can become chametz. Therefore, it is fitting and proper to harvest the wheat while the stalks, still have somewhat of a greenish appearance. Whoever is able to use matzahs that are baked with wheat that has been safeguarded from the time of reaping for all the days of the Pesach holiday is conducting himself in a preferable manner by doing so. In other words, that's the right way how to do it. Due to the concern that the stalks of wheat may have been in contact with water, once they were dried and ready for harvesting. Sibir Halacha 453. As well as other concerns that the Chayadim brings down. The custom is that the matzahs used for the entire Pesach are safeguarded from the time the wheat is ground, or at the very least from the time the dough is kneaded. Mishnah Berurah 453:25. Nowadays, much of the wheat used for commercial flour is washed during processing and must be treated as chametz, and may certainly not be used for matzahs. So all year round, matzahs are not Pesach matzahs. Okay. If one is not able to do this for the entire Pesach, it is fitting that he should, at the very least, see to enhance the performance of the mitzvah by doing this for the matzahs that are used for the Seder, for both nights, in other words. Okay, we'll go to paragraph 2. If among the wheat kernels that were found, there were found kernels that are split open or sprouting, which are chametz, the rest are permitted, the rest are okay, provided that they are not moist. Mishnah Berurah 467:20. Provided that those that are split open or sprouting are separated and removed. Alternatively, if one prefers not to remove them, he must take much care to ascertain that the volume of wheat kernels that were not split open or sprouting present in the mixture is at least 60 times the volume of those that are split open or sprouting. Okay, we'll go further. Initially, one should enhance the mitzvah by also separating the wheat kernels from which mice nibbled. Okay, this is due to the concern that the mouse's saliva may have caused the wheat to leaven. That's pretty nasty, right? Or to ascertain that the kernels that have not been touched by mice contain 60 times the volume, the kernels from which the mice nibbled. With regard to wheat that arrived by ship, or that was stored in pits in the ground, in these cases there is reason for concern that the wheat may have come into contact with water. If we know that the kernels came into contact with water, they may not be used regardless of whether their appearance has changed or not. That's Mishnah Berurah 467:12. The halacha is that if the wheat kernels are dry and hard, and their appearance did not change, in other words, the kernels did not show signs of splitting, they're kosher for use for Pesach. If they were placed in the attic and rainwater fell on them through leaks in the roof in some places, this is in a case where the concern is that they have gotten quite wet, as the Mishnah Berurah says, they are prohibited. Okay. But if a small amount of snow fell on them, or a small amount of water in one place, one removes the ones regarding which there's a reason for doubt, and the rest are permitted. Okay, chapter 3. The accepted custom among the Jewish people is to be meticulous with regard to making the flour mill fit for Pesach use, by thoroughly removing all residue and cleaning it out as much as possible. That's the flour mill. With regard to the cloth pouches for the flour, new ones are purchased. Okay, this is how Rav Feinstein brings down the Moshe, Aruch 1:151. In a place where there are Torah scrolls, the Torah scholars, they go to the mill to oversee that the process of making the mill fit for Pesach use is performed properly. Where there are no Torah scholars to oversee the process, it is proper for every God-fearing person to go personally in order to oversee the process of making the mill fit for Pesach use. For it is a greater mitzvah to perform the mitzvah oneself rather than sending someone else to do it for you. At the minimum, the grinding should be supervised by a God-fearing adult who is familiar with the laws. Mishnah Berurah 453:41. And the custom is that the first flour that is ground after the mill is made fit for Pesach use. We do not eat on Pesach the first flour is made fit for Pesach use. We do not eat on Pesach. In fact, care must even be taken to ensure that the flour does not become wet from condensation. As Mishnah Berurah says in 466:3, if this occurred, or in any similar situation where the flour may have been exposed to moisture, it is imperative that a halachic authority be consulted. If they are also grinding soaked grain in the mill, at the time of the grinding of the wheat for the matzahs, the area must be set off with a petition in order that the flour dust from the soaked grain does not get mixed up with the Pesach flour. Okay, number 4. After the wheat has been ground, one must continue to take the utmost care that the flour not come into contact with water and become chametz. The law regarding a sack of flour that became wet with water is as follows. If it became wet in only one place, whether it is still wet or whether it has dried, he should hold the place that became wet with his hand and empty out the rest of the sack. The flour that was emptied out is permitted, and only the flour that became wet is prohibited. Okay. But if it became wet in a number of places, and it is thus not possible to do this, to separate the flour that became wet by holding the place that became wet, then halacha is that if it is still wet, he should sift the flour, and those crumbs that remain on the sifter alone are considered chametz, and the rest of the flour is permitted. Similarly, if mice ate from the flour, one should sift it. However, if it is already dried, sifting is not effective to permit the unaffected flour, and all the flour is prohibited. Okay, paragraph 5. Normally, flour will not become chametz until 18 minutes have elapsed from the time it came in contact with water. Nevertheless, if the dough is warm, it may become chametz more rapidly. For this reason, various precautions are taken that the flour should not become warm, as this will speed up the fermentation process when the flour is mixed with water. On the day that the flour is ground, it is prohibited to bake it, for then the flour is still warm and it becomes leavened more quickly when water is put on it. Therefore, one should wait after the grinding for at least a 24-hour period before using the flour. At least overnight, Mishnah Berurah says in 466. It's even recommended to wait if the wheat was ground by hand, says the Shulchan. If one did knead the dough on the day that the flour was ground, it may be used, but one must take extra care to knead it and bake it quickly so that it should not become chametz. Mishnah Berurah 43 over there, 453. Yeah. Number 6, with regards to the sacks into which the flour is placed, it is preferable that new ones be made, or at the very least, one should undo the stitching on the used ones and launder them very well with hot water and ashes, and by scrubbing them and beating them. Number 7, and this is the last chapter for tonight, last paragraph for tonight, in Kitzer. It is forbidden to place a sack of flour for matzahs on an animal unless there is a thick piece of leather beneath the sack. For if not, the flour will become warm and also get moist from the perspiration of the animal. Okay. And if possible, he should also take care not to place many sacks one upon the other, since they will thus become warm and leaven more quickly during the kneading process. Let's see what Rabbi Braun says in Shulchan Halacha 108, and then we'll get a great Chassidishe story. 108. We started with the verse that says in the Torah, Ushmatim es hamatzis, which is in Shmos 12:17. Now the Pri Megadim, Mishpat Zav, Siman Tov Samach, that's 460. Quotes the Paiskim, the halachic deciders, the rabbis of the generations that we live by their word, hold that the responsibility of watching the matzahs, we learned 3 different views, exactly, l'shay matzah, what it means exactly, but this is minat Torah, this is a doraisa, this is a Torah mitzvah, and it's not to say just, but it's not from the sages. However, there are those that learn that it is from the sages, according to this Pri Megadim, and the verse that's quoted is only an esmachta ba'alma. It's only a reference, but the actual mitzvah is a drabanan, is a one that the sages decided upon. The Bach and the Chayk Yaakov hold that's midrabanan, that's from the sages. Pri Chadash holds that's from the Torah. We also find that the earlier commentaries, like the Rajma in his Answer, Simon Chavav, that's 26, and Tav Kuf Tzadik Beis, and also from the Rambam, from Maimonides in the 5th chapter of the Laws of Chametz HaMatzah, Halacha Test, the 9th Halacha, also seems that it's from the Torah. Mishnah Berurah in Bir Halacha and Tav Samach, that's 460, also seems to hold like those that hold that it's Midarais, it's from the Torah itself. Okay. He mentioned, the Kitzer mentioned about it being done l'shem matzahs mitzvah, specifically for matzahs mitzvah, the first 2 nights of the first night. The other view is for all the nights. Pri Megadim and the Mishnah Berurah bring down an interesting thing. Does it have to be protected, kept, and watched from the time of the cutting and from the grinding? That it should be lishma, in other words, for this sake, having in mind for this mitzvah. Shematz's mitzvah, or it's good enough where it's just being kept away from chametz. The difference would be if it would be done through a non-Jew or through one who is exempt from mitzvahs, like a chereshite of a cotton, the three that are always exempt from mitzvahs, someone who doesn't hear and he's not part of society, or a shaita, someone who is not normal, or a cotton, someone who's underaged. A poor person who lives from charity, and he's truly a medactic mitzvahs, he's truly a God-fearing person and does mitzvahs scrupulously. So the Pesach brings down from the Maryam Vilna that when they give out the charity matzahs, he has to be given according to the way he performs the mitzvah. We'll stop here meanwhile as far as this is concerned. Now we need a great story, right? So in the times of the Holy Oiv Yisrael, the Rav, whose Yotzeit is coming up the 5th of Nisan, besides being one of the biggest rabbis that ever lived, he was also one of a Gewaldike, great Pesach, a decider in Halacha. And there was a poor person who used to be rich. He was once a very big businessman, and he lost all his possessions. Sadly enough, things went down. Like Chazal teach us, the world is like a wheel. Person thinks he stays always on the top, but people go down. Some people are depressed and broken. They think there'll always be paupers, but sometimes it goes up, whatever Hashem decides. So there was a poor person who used to be very rich, and he comes to the Rav, to the Helik of Yisrael. He says to him, Rebbe, my daughter is growing up. I'm going to have to make a shidduch. I have to marry Aruch. What should I do? And the whole time the Rav was sitting with his eyes closed. Obviously, he was in a higher place. And after a number of minutes, he opens his eyes and he says, listen to me, Reb Noach, his name was Reb Noach, how much money do you have on you right now? So he said, I have one coin. He says, the first deal that comes your way, first business deal, give away that money and you'll prosper like never before. Reb Noach's very happy because with his emunah pshuta, his simple belief in Hashem and his tzaddikim, which the Holy Baal Shem Tov strengthened, as the Chazal teach us, especially the Moshe B'chol Daira, in every generation we have tzaddikim that do great things. He starts walking home, and those days people would walk for days, for months, for weeks, for sure, and he's walking for 12, 14 hours until he has no kayach, no more strength to walk. So he goes into this nearby inn, sits down in the back. It seems like it was a pretty classy place, and there were a bunch of rich salesman sitting at a table right next to where he sat down, but he sat down in the back and he took a piece of bread, I knew a guy who used to say that he goes into a restaurant and just has the bread that's on the table and a little salt and orders a cup of water, and what could they charge him already for that, right? Anyway, so this guy sits down by a table all by himself in the corner, and right next to him is this table with these fancy, high-class people. And they see this Reb Noach sitting over there, and they needed to have a little bit fun after a long day of working. So they call out to him and say, Reb Yid, what's your name? He says, my name is Reb Noach. And they say to him, no, are you going to buy the mansion that the landowner has for sale now? So he says, I'd love to. And they all start laughing and laughing. Finally, one guy who thought he's a real chaverman, he's like a cute guy, and he wants to get everybody's attention and admiration. And he says to me, Reb Noach, come over here. How much money do you have on you? He says, I have one coin, a quarter, whatever it is. You want to do a business deal? Of course I do. I used to be a very big businessman. You look at me now with my torn clothes and I sit in the corner and have some bread. But there was a time that I would be sitting with you guys by this table over here. He says, okay, very well, Reb Noach. I'm selling you my Olam Haba, my portion in the world to come. Of course, then it was a little bit of a joke because he was a religious guy, but it wasn't so important to me. Noach says, great deal. I'm giving you my quarter, but this is not just going to go like this. We have to write out a contract and sign with 2 witnesses, and these guys, they're sitting there, they're roaring from laughter, and this guy, popular guy, he really made a fool out of this guy, By some people, that's considered being popular, sadly enough. But anyway, so they write out a contract and they sign it. And while they're in the middle of having this great laugh, who do you think walks in, if not the wife of this guy? The big guy, the guy who just became so popular. The cool guy, like they say today, right? The cool guy. Anyway, she starts screaming at him, you sold your place in the world to come? Paradise? I'm not going to live with a guy. I'm not going to live with someone who doesn't have any place in the world to come. Come with me right now to the Abderav, and I'm going to get a get from you, and get a divorce from you. I says, hey, darling, I didn't know it was so holy and religious, all of a sudden, she says, and she gets even more serious and even more angry. She says, what are you talking about? A Jew shouldn't consider his place in the world to come as worth anything? Where are your values? I mean, I'm not saying, but this is something that's basic. Every Jew knows. Anyway, so his friends say to him, yeah, buddy, you better listen to the lady because she's serious. He says to himself, what did I do? And he goes over to Reb Noach and he says to me, to Reb Noach, dear Reb Noach, please have mercy on me. I'll give you $10. What? $10? Nothing doing. The Gan Eden is mine. Place in paradise is mine, and I was serious about this, and I told you I was serious, and we wrote out a contract, and we have witnesses. No, this doesn't go just like that. So he says, Reb Noach, what would you consider fair? He says, $40,000. He says, oh, please, have mercy on me. He says, I have mercy on you. I'm helping you. Your wife wants a divorce. 40,000 is not that bad. Anyway, and his friends are laughing at him. Oh, yeah, look what you got yourself into. This disgruntled old guy over here who takes life serious. I mean, Well, this guy wrote out a check for $40,000. And Reb Noach gives him back the transaction. They rip it up. And then first his wife, who was a smart lady, says, come, we're going to go to the Abderav anyway. I'm not going to ask a divorce from you. But I want to ask him a question that was bothering me this whole time while this was going on. And they walked into the Abderav. And the Abderav is sitting and smiling because he knew already everything that happened through his open prophecy, his Ruach HaKodesh. And she says, Rabbi, I want to ask you, was my husband's place in the world to come worth $40,000? And the helicopter Rav smiles and says, at the time that he sold it for 25 cents, it was not even worth the quarter. But since he sold it and did such an unbelievable mitzvah for so much money, and within that mitzvah is also the mitzvah of marrying off a daughter of Israel, Chnesses Kala, his place in the world to come is worth much, much more than the 40 G's. And from then on, this man and his wife became scrupulously pious, good people, and did many mitzvahs. And Reb Noach went back into business, became the great businessman that he used to be. Have a good night.